In this video, we are going to be taking a look at a very interesting semi-automatic shotgun of German origin. The gun lacks any markings that would clearly identify the manufacturer, but evidence points to it having been made by Schmeisser. Let's start with the basic facts. From the proof marks, we know that it was made in Germany. The proofs date to 1936. And we can clearly see that it is a design inspired by the Browning Auto 5. Let's take a closer look at how it works. All right, let's go over the basics of the operation. Here we have our bolt handle. We pull this back to open the action. The bolt release closes the action. This piece here you can see is simply a sliding dust cover. Over here we have a cross bolt safety. Very simple. It functions simply by blocking the trigger, as you can see there. Very simple. The bolt release also locks the loading gate here. This here is a magazine cutoff. Quite different than the cutoff on the Browning Auto 5. It presses up, which is that way, in this orientation to block the shells coming from the magazine tube. And then down, in this case up, to release. Now I will demonstrate the operation using a snap cap. First, we press the button, allowing this round to be loaded into the tube. If you look here, you can see the shell stop is there, located on the bolt, similar to the Auto 5. From this position, we can't use the cutoff. To use the cutoff, we have to press the shell fully into the tube and then press this down. Now you can see the shell is retained in the tube fully. Now if we open the action, you can see it locks open and the shell does not automatically load into the chamber. Now I will depress the cutoff and that will chamber around. Then of course, like any similar gun, we pull the trigger, and if that were a live round, it would automatically eject. And since the gun is empty, it locks open again. Now let's take it apart and look at some of the internal features. Okay, before I begin disassembly, I'll note that if you look here, you can see the number 10 hand stamped. That is presumably the serial number of the piece. There are a couple proof marks, but those don't really tell us much of anything useful. So first we lock the action open to relieve some of the spring tension. Then we unscrew the magazine cap. Then everything starts coming apart. Forend can be removed. If you look here at the front of the forend and the back of the magazine cap, you can see there isn't any sort of detent or anything. These are simply held together with friction. Then we can remove the barrel. Now, one interesting feature to note here is if you look inside the ring here, this has a brass friction piece built directly into the barrel. Then we have another friction ring here and a recoil spring, square cross section. That is the basics of the field stripping. Here you can see the proof marks. Unfortunately, most of this is not helpful. The Germans weren't applying marks indicating what proof house was doing this at the time, so the only thing that gives us any useful information is the 436 at the bottom here, which tells us the marks were applied in April of 1936. So we have an approximate age for the gun, but that's about all this tells us. Let's disassemble further. First, we have this screw here on the lower tang, which is going to be very awkward to get out, as you will see shortly. That lets us remove the stock. Next, we have the screw here. Then the last thing holding in the trigger group is this pin here. It pushes out pretty easily, and then the trigger group is removed. Now let's discuss this and how it helps point to the manufacturer of the gun being Schmeisser. Here we have a copy of U.S. Patent 1930864, issued to H. Schmeisser for automatic firearm. If you look at this, it should be fairly obvious that this is for a shotgun design. This is filed March 5th of 1932. I believe he filed the German equivalent in sometime in 1931. Now, the thing to understand is during this period in Germany, there's very little evidence that any other manufacturers were developing any similar firearms. That is the main evidence pointing to this gun here having been made by Schmeisser. Since the firearm described in this patent, if there was one made following this design, it would have been made sometime in 1931 or 1930. That is a few years before the example we have here, so it wouldn't be surprising if the design had changed quite a bit in that time. we actually see very little in common between this drawing and the actual example here. In fact, the main commonality here is this, the hammer spring being located in front of the trigger guard. This example is quite more simple than the patent drawings, but overall the firearm is much simplified. What I believe this represents is an attempt by Schmeisser to make a more economical design, something that would have been more viable on the market. Now, the last thing I would like to discuss is how this gun might have gotten here. Unfortunately, there was no provenance, so we know little to nothing. Regardless of if it was made by Schmeisser or someone else, the most likely explanation is that it was brought back by an American soldier. We have one small clue to go on. Looking at the lower tang, we can see there are some markings scratched on. It appears to be something like AB 61107, although it's difficult to know for sure if the first number is a 6 or a 0. Likewise for the fourth number. It does look like there might be a small space between the first and second and third and fourth digits there, so the most likely assumption is that this could be a date. If it is a date, then we can at least eliminate the possibility of the first number being 0. Assuming the person who made the markings was American, that would give us June 11th of 07 or 67. If it's June 11th of 1907, then that could be a birth date, and AB could be initials. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any American soldier with that birth date and initials, so it could be something entirely different. I hope that this video has been interesting. If you have any thoughts on this gun, please share them.